morning. I can either talk to you like this or stoop down and talk to you like this. So if anybody can hear me, just let me know. Working on a northeastern Brazilian sugar plantation in the 21st century, most workers are surrounded by only one genus of plant, genus Sakura, sugarcane. So it is remarkable that I learned during my 2012 master's field work that the settlers of the Frei Gondim diversified agricultural settlement in Pernambuco, Brazil, still retain significant local ecological knowledge of the medicinal plants of the Atlantic Rainforest around them, considering that most of them are former longtime sugarcane workers. I conducted a small ethnobotanical study as part of a larger ethnographic study, whose focus was to assess the economic and ecological sustainability of the settlement. Here, Moises is holding Clavaca, Ocimum campesianum, which is a member of the mint family. I interviewed 25 informants for the agrarian study, and 7 of those were ethnobotanical informants. Their information led me to collect 35 plants, 17 of which had medicinal value. I dried and pressed the plants and identified them with the help of a Pernambuco ethnobotanist and a Pernambuco herbarium curator. I used plant lists published in well-known scientific journals to determine the origin of the plants, whether they're from the Atlantic Rainforest or exotic to the Atlantic Rainforest. Some of those were actually native to the Amazon, but they were not part of the Atlantic Rainforest. In the image, Carlos is discussing the medicinal uses of tree bark. You can see the tree behind him where he removed the strip of bark to discuss the medicinal uses. Ethnobotany, and this is really the main argument of my presentation today. Ethnobotany can be useful in helping to answer questions in other fields. In my larger agrarian study, I collected data to assess the likelihood that the Frei Gondim settlers will overcome economic and ecological challenges. My ethnobotanical survey helped to answer some important ecological questions in the larger project. Specifically, I learned that the Frei Gondim settlers have the necessary local ecological knowledge to practice stewardship and conservation of resources. In this way, ethnobotany can serve as a bridge between natural science and social science. In the image, Francisco is standing in front of his macaxeira plants, which is Pernambuco staple starch. It's a close relative to manioc, which is Brazil's staple starch. Now, the study area was in Pernambuco, but the Atlantic Rainforest used to extend all the way from Pernambuco all the way down the eastern seaboard to Sao Paulo, one of the world's most richest areas in terms of biological diversity. Much of that is now sugar plantations, coffee plantations, farms, cities, etc. So only a small patches remain. But I'd argue here that the forest does remain, even on agricultural settlements. In the state of Pernambuco, in the western part of the state, you have the Sertão biome, which is the kind of desert scrub, and you have a transition zone here, the Agreste. In the eastern part of the state, you have a forest zone now, largely sugar plantations, and the blue zone is the ocean. The tan part is the metropolitan region around the city of Recife. The Frei Gondim Settlement is in the municipality of Gameleira, here indicated by the arrow. Now, I use this image of the center of the settlement to give you an idea of the diversity of crops and land uses on the settlement. Sugarcane, soursop, banana, cow, corn, dendé palm. Dendé oil is used in Afro-Brazilian cooking. It's also a very important ingredient in candomblé religion. If any of you are familiar with the sacred leaves of candomblé. It's also a cosmetic. Women put it in their hair. Coconut palms, olive trees, forest preserve. Now the settlers are required to keep 20% of the 1,048 hectare settlement in forest preserve, and they've actually done that. Brazil has one of the most unequal distributions of wealth and property in the world. 28 years ago, Brazil's landless settlers movement, the MST, was founded in order to confront that injustice. The landless settlers occupy land, cultivate it, now this is fallow land, and push for expropriation using legal channels. They've successfully obtained title to land for over 1 million people in Brazil, making it the Western Hemisphere's most important social movement. The center of their philosophy has always been local food for local people and ecologically sustainable practices. The northeast of Brazil has been one of their priorities, and specifically because of the legacy of slavery in the northeast of Brazil. And in the 20th century, low sugar wages, which has led to the irony of hunger in one of the world's most productive agricultural zones. Environmentally, you've seen the destruction of the rainforest, and in the 20th century, heavy inputs of chemical agriculture, which has led to the pollution of waterways and streams and the groundwater. It was with this in mind that the MST founded the Frei Gondim Settlement in 1994, specifically to present a living alternative to sugar monoculture. A year earlier, Robert Denning published his book, Smallholders, Householders, in 1993. And this is based on a career worth of assessing peasant agriculture across the world. In this book, he writes, "It is my contention that smallholder-intensive systems achieve high production, combine subsistence and market benefits, transform energy efficiently, and encourage practices of stewardship and conservation of resources." Now, I use that statement as a rubric to assess the ecological and economic sustainability of the settlement. Specifically, I found that they increased production by diversifying crops from initially growing nothing but sugar cane, because that's what they were familiar with, to growing 17 crops. They combined subsistence and market benefits by eating many of their cash crops. Everything is edible, except for arguably sugar cane, in the form that you see there. Also, they participated in an agrarian reform market, which the MST founded in the nearby town of Gamaleira for the settlers. Ecologically, some of the settlers practiced organic agriculture, while others used very chemically intensive form of agriculture, using herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers. So the idea behind my ethnobotanical study was to learn what the potential was for these settlers to, on a general level, practice stewardship and conservation of resources. Seven of the 17 plants with medicinal uses were native Atlantic Rainforest plants. So 41% of the plants that I collected and identified were from the forest, which I believe shows a significant local ecological knowledge. 9 of the plants, as you can see, I've organized them based on their uses. So these 7 plus 2 more on the next page treat intestinal ailments. And I do not think that's a coincidence, considering the history of malnutrition in this area, that we would see stomach ailments, symptom of malnutrition, to be so prominent. The majority of the plants treat this condition. And the most frequent indication for the plants is the tea from the leaf or other parts of the plant. 2 of the plants treat respiratory ailments. And two of the plants treat spiritual ills, evil eye. There's even a plant specifically for animals, cattle skin parasites. In terms of distribution by family, there's only one family that had more than one representative among specimens, and that's the well-known medicinal plant family of the mint family, Lamiaceae. One of these is also a native Atlantic Rainforest plant. And the rest of the specimens all belong to different families. The only thing I can generalize here is that many of these were herbaceous plants found in disturbed areas of the settlement. In conclusion, I found significant local ecological knowledge on the settlement, which gives the potential for the settlers generally to practice stewardship and conservation of resources. Whether they end up actually practicing those on a general level across the settlement will have to be the focus of a future study. In this image, Sophia, the president of the Women's Producers Association on the settlement, is selling at the Agrarian Reform Market in Camarera. You can see one of her neighbors has an MST hat on. She's selling macaxeira and coconuts. These are both coconuts. And this is soursop here, the #1 crop on the settlement, Caribbean tree fruit. And that concludes my presentation. I stand for any questions.
Thank you, William. So do we have some questions?
You mentioned that they kept a lot of forest land. Is this forest connected or is it separated?
It's not contiguous. What you saw there peeking out into the center of the settlement was part of it, and then you had to hike a couple of kilometers to get to another larger area. One interesting thing is that not all of the parcels remained occupied, and rather than selling those parcels off, there was no family member to take it over. Many of those parcels were returning to forest, kind of here and there across the settlement. It was a very green settlement. And I guess they called that kind of secondary forest capoeira.
Anyone else? Well, everyone just about the exotic, sort of native mix of plants. But the exotic ones are they long-term exotics that were introduced by people over the last recent generations and have been forever.
I think that they're all anthropogenic. Some of the exotics are, basil, things that must have been brought in because they had culinary uses and escaped from the herbarium. I mean, not the herbarium, the garden. But some of them somehow made their way, possibly from the Amazon, are very typical native Brazilian plants that just happen to not be Atlantic Rainforest natives.
Anyone else with questions? Thank you. Our next presentation is Janelle